The grand chamber of the Galactic Council gleamed in a sea of refracted light. Its immense crystalline dome sparkled under the soft pulses of energy beams that danced through the ceiling. In every seat around the vast amphitheater sat the representatives of the galaxy's greatest civilizations, a tapestry of forms fluid, scaled, winged, mechanical. The chamber, alive with a low, buzzing hum of conversation, felt strangely somber. This was no routine session. Chancellor Vrex, a towering figure whose sinewy frame shimmered with the reflective sheen of his race's metallic carapace, stood at the podium. His voice, resonant and carefully measured, echoed through the chamber. "The matter before us is unprecedented," Vrex began, his multifaceted eyes scanning the room. "We have sought peace with the humans. We have offered them land, resources, and membership within our alliance. Each gesture met with silence. Each offer rejected. What, I ask, is to be done with a species that refuses peace at every turn?" Murmurs rippled through the assembly. The SciFi delegate, a floating sphere of plasma contained within a lattice of magnetic fields, vibrated with agitation. "Perhaps they misunderstand our intent," it suggested, its voice a high-pitched resonance in the chamber's translator system. "These creatures have no central leadership. Their factions may not even be aware of our proposals." An elder representative of the Verdarii, whose serpentine body coiled elegantly beneath a cascade of translucent fronds, hissed a counterpoint. "Ignorance is no excuse for defiance. If they cannot unify their own kind, how can they be trusted to stand among us?" In the back of the chamber, an Eldrin envoy, their translucent skin shimmering like starlight, raised a delicate hand. "We must consider the precedent we set. If we use force against humanity, we risk shattering the ideals of unity and diplomacy that this council was built upon." The debate wore on for hours. Each species brought its own history of war, peace, and survival to bear on the argument. Some remembered what it was like to be young and defiant, clawing their way into the galactic stage. Others carried the scars of neighbors who had once refused to cooperate, plunging their regions into centuries of conflict. Every voice agreed that humanity's unchecked expansion was a problem. But how to handle them? That was where consensus faltered. At last, Chancellor Vrex raised a hand to still the murmurs. "Enough. We cannot allow this impasse to persist. I propose a final offer. One that leaves no room for confusion." His voice grew solemn. "We will present humanity with a single, unifying message. A simple proposal: peace, cooperation, and a place at this council. They will have one galactic cycle to respond. If they reject us again, if they remain silent, then the council must consider stronger measures." The chamber fell silent. Even those inclined toward diplomacy knew the meaning behind Vrex's words. This was not simply another offer. This was an ultimatum. The vote passed, though not without resistance. The final decision, a single, unified message, would be sent to every human colony, government, and outpost. It would carry the signature of every council member. There would be no ambiguity, no question of intent. The ultimatum would reach humanity's scattered factions simultaneously, leaving them no excuse for ignorance. If humanity refused yet again, the council's course of action would be clear. As the session adjourned, the delegates filed out into the corridors of the great chamber, their whispers blending with the ambient hum of the council's vast, living infrastructure. Overhead, the crystalline dome dimmed, mirroring the gravity of the moment. The message itself had not yet been transmitted, but the feeling was undeniable. The galaxy stood at a threshold. Far from the council's grand halls, the members of humanity on their patchwork colonies and freighter decks remained blissfully unaware of the choice that would soon be thrust upon them. For now, the only sound in the void was the quiet hum of solar winds against hull plating. But soon, every outpost and settlement would hear the council's voice. The countdown to humanity's answer had begun. The message came through loud and clear broadcast on all known human communication networks, encoded in multiple languages, even in the old Earth tongues that few still spoke. The Council's ultimatum cut through the noise of daily life on colonies and space stations, its stern, measured tone leaving no room for doubt. The galaxy was offering one final hand in peace. If humanity refused once more, the consequences would be on their heads. For a brief, eerie moment, humanity's scattered factions paused to listen. But just as quickly, the arguments began. In the glistening towers of Titan Central, corporate executives met in gleaming boardrooms, their faces reflected on polished tables. The corporate alliance, the single largest economic power in human space, dismissed the Council's ultimatum with a mixture of disdain and suspicion. This so-called peace, one CEO sneered, comes with strings we cannot see. Access to resources? Membership in their Grand Council? They want us dependent. Subservient. Another executive nodded. Their timing is suspect. Humanity is expanding faster than ever. They fear our potential. They'd rather have us shackled now than see us rise as equals. On the barren plains of New Pyongyang, an independent colony famous for its fierce isolationism, a very different conversation unfolded in the shadow of a rudimentary spaceport. Colonists gathered in a low-tech meeting hall, faces sun-worn, hands calloused from years of backbreaking work. Their concerns were less about conspiracy and more about survival. They can keep their peace offers, one farmer growled, the smell of oil and soil clinging to his coveralls. We don't need alien rules or alien handouts. We've survived on our own so far. But what if this isn't just a handout? A younger colonist asked cautiously. What if it's a real chance to secure our future? A place on the Council might mean more protection, more trade opportunities. A derisive laugh swept through the room. The colony's elder, a gray-haired woman with a gaze as sharp as flint, stood slowly and silenced the murmurs. It's not about what they offer, she said. It's about who we are. We left Earth to escape someone else's authority. If we give in to this so-called peace, we're handing over our future before we've even built it. In the sprawling underground complexes of Earth's Central Coalition, arguably the closest thing humanity had to a central government, politicians and officials huddled in dimly lit chambers. The Central Coalition had always been more diplomatic than the frontier colonies or the corporate entities, but even they couldn't agree on a unified response. If we reject them, they might see it as a declaration of war, one diplomat said nervously, tapping at a holographic map of Council-controlled star systems. But if we accept, countered another, we risk becoming a vassal state. We don't even know the Council's full internal politics. How many species are in their alliance? How many have been subjugated or silenced? How do we know we won't end up like them? A grizzled fleet admiral, leaning against the edge of the briefing table, finally spoke up. What we know is this: humanity has made it this far without bowing to anyone. We won't start now. We'll keep expanding. And if they try to stop us... He trailed off, leaving the implication hanging in the air. This pattern repeated itself across human space. In orbital habitats and mining colonies, on isolated moons and bustling trade hubs, humanity's fractured nature played out in full. No single leader emerged to take charge of the situation. No unified voice rose above the din. Instead, every faction saw the ultimatum through their own lens: pride, fear, suspicion, independence, and all came to the same conclusion: rejecting the Council's peace offer was the only way to maintain their freedom, no matter the cost. As the deadline approached, the Council's diplomats waited for a response that never came. On Earth and among the colonies, humanity braced for an uncertain future. They had no clear plan, no overarching strategy, but they were united in one thing: a stubborn refusal to surrender their autonomy. Even if it meant chaos. Even if it meant war. In the Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council, the silence following humanity's non-response was deafening. Chancellor Vrex stood at the center podium, his faceted eyes scanning the assembly. Every delegate waited, tension thick in the air. When no further message from humanity came, the chamber erupted in an uproar. The expansionists, those species who had long advocated a more aggressive approach, saw the moment as proof that their warnings had gone unheeded. A towering Aryan delegate, its translucent skin pulsing with anger, spoke first. "They refuse our peace," it intoned. "They refuse our generosity. If the Council does not act now, we send a clear signal to every upstart species in the galaxy: defiance has no consequences." Across the chamber, the moderates countered. The Elori representative, a crystalline being whose voice rang like chimes, raised a hand. "We must not be hasty. Humanity has proven difficult, but they are still young. A rash response risks destroying not only them, but the very foundations of this council. Remember what happened to the Keolani Empire when we moved too swiftly. The scars of that war have not healed." Debates turned into shouting matches, old grievances bubbling to the surface. The Eukaryotes, a species known for their calm demeanor, began accusing their longtime allies, the Circathans, of pushing for conflict to gain control of disputed systems near human territory. The Circathans, a proud avian-like race, shot back, accusing the Eukaryotes of cowardice and pandering to humanity's chaos. What had started as a unified response to a single species had become a catalyst for exposing deep, underlying tensions among the council members. The crystalline dome overhead, once a symbol of transparent cooperation, now seemed to magnify the divisions below. Some of the smaller, previously neutral species began to waver. Should they support the expansionists and ensure their protection against humanity's inevitable rise? Or should they side with the moderates, who advocated continued diplomacy and patience? As the infighting escalated, key council members retreated into private chambers. Unofficial alliances formed in the shadows. The Barracks, a species of immense, methane-breathing giants, quietly offered their fleet to the expansionists in exchange for a say in post-conflict territorial divisions. The SHOC, a coalition of smaller aquatic species, began pooling resources to defend their holdings in case the council split entirely. Every delegate had one eye on humanity and the other on their rivals. In the midst of the chaos, Chancellor Vrex struggled to maintain order. His booming voice commanded attention once more. "If we turn against each other now, we lose more than just a solution to the human problem. We lose what this council stands for. We must find common ground." But the common ground was crumbling beneath their feet. The Aryan and the Circathans were already drawing up contingency war plans. The Elori and other moderates tried to salvage the peace effort, proposing more time for humanity to respond, perhaps another cycle, maybe two. But the expansionists saw any delay as weakness. The delegates who had once been staunch allies now eyed each other with suspicion, their trust eroded by the long and fruitless debate. Soon, whispers of splinter factions emerged. Some began quietly discussing the formation of a new coalition, one that would enforce galactic law without the cumbersome bureaucracy of the Council. Others talked of withdrawing their species entirely and focusing on their own regions, letting humanity's defiance remain someone else's problem. The very concept of a united galactic body seemed at risk of disintegration. In private, Vrex confided in his closest advisors. "I never thought a species as scattered as humanity could provoke such discord among us," he admitted, his metallic frame glinting under the chamber's artificial light. "We have faced greater threats before. What is it about them that shakes us so?" His advisors had no answers. The truth was that humanity's rejection of the Council's peace offers had become more than a diplomatic failure. It had exposed the weaknesses, mistrust, and competing agendas that had always simmered beneath the surface. Now, with every proposal rejected, every debate descending into acrimony, the once unassailable Galactic Council faced its greatest crisis, itself. And all the while, humanity watched from the shadows, unaware of the turmoil it had unleashed. Far beyond the Council's glittering chamber, humanity remained divided. On Mars, engineers in massive domed cities worked through the nights, refitting old orbital defense platforms with experimental railguns. In the asteroid belts, private corporations poured resources into converting mining drones into makeshift combat drones. And on Earth, within the subterranean halls of the Central Coalition's capital, political infighting gave way to urgent talks about survival. The rejection of the Council's ultimatum was not a unifying moment for humanity, it was a wake-up call. The realization dawned that the galaxy, once thought distant and unconcerned with humanity's affairs, was suddenly very close and very interested. And with the Council's splintering alliances now a poorly kept secret, some human leaders began to see the crisis as an opportunity rather than a threat. Among the independent colonies, rumors spread that certain alien factions, disillusioned with the Council's gridlock, were willing to speak directly to humanity. A small mining colony on the edge of human territory received a coded transmission from an Allori diplomat. The message was cautious, but the implications were clear. Not all species in the Council agreed with the expansionists. Some were open to a more informal arrangement, one that didn't require humanity to submit to the Council's authority. For the colonists who had always valued their independence, this was the kind of peace offer they could consider. Meanwhile, on Luna, the corporate alliance met behind closed doors. Executives debated whether they could leverage the Council's internal divisions for profit. One faction proposed supplying certain alien species with technology in exchange for future trade privileges. Another suggested selling human-designed defense platforms to moderate Council members who feared a war would destabilize their borders. While the corporations were reluctant to put their resources at risk, they recognized that the Council's fractures could be exploited for humanity's benefit. It was a gamble, but if played well, it could turn humanity from a liability into a key player. On Earth, a weary diplomat from the Central Coalition prepared a report for the planet's governing council. The report outlined a plan to secretly dispatch emissaries to sympathetic Council delegate species known to oppose military action. These emissaries would not be carrying peace offers, nor would they apologize for humanity's defiance. Instead, their goal was to quietly secure guarantees of non-aggression and, if possible, limited trade agreements. This approach would not heal the schism humanity had caused, but it might provide enough breathing room to prepare for whatever came next. As humanity's scattered factions scrambled to adapt, the Galactic Council's unity continued to deteriorate. Expansionist species grew increasingly frustrated with the lack of decisive action, threatening to break away and form their own coalition. The moderates struggled to hold the center, attempting to delay any vote on military intervention while they worked to repair relations with humanity's more reasonable elements. The once stable council was now a patchwork of overlapping conspiracies and grudging partnerships, none of which seemed strong enough to hold the galaxy together. But even as the council fractured, the seeds of a new future began to sprout. Humanity's refusal to yield, while reckless, had forced both humans and aliens to reconsider the nature of interstellar politics. Old assumptions about power, unity, and diplomacy were being rewritten. New connections, shaky and informal though they were, began to take shape. A disgruntled alien trader found common cause with a human mining outpost. A minor council species with no stake in the expansionists' plans opened quiet trade talks with a Martian corporation. Though no one could see it at the time, these scattered interactions were the first threads of a tapestry that would eventually weave a new order. For now, humanity stood on the precipice, its future uncertain. The Galactic Council was no longer the monolithic force it had once been, but that instability carried its own dangers. A spark could ignite a war, or it could light the way for a new kind of galactic relationship, one built not on top-down control, but on messy, fragile cooperation. Whether humanity could survive long enough to shape that future was still an open question. But for the first time, they were no longer simply reacting to the galaxy's moves. They were making their own.